planner of the day, Austin. Austin, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So, I'd like to know a little bit about your journey to urban planning. And so, take us way back, if you would. What was Austin doing in high school? Or what was Austin's vision of his future?
When I was in high school, actually, I knew I wanted to be a planner. Um,
Yeah.
I always, I didn't necessarily maybe have the best understanding of what planning is, but from from a child, I was always building cities. Like,
Nice.
like I was
Okay.
using blocks and
Yeah.
stuff to build.
Same. Almost.
Um, to build typically train stations, and I would have Thomas the Tank Engine and have like just this little towns built of blocks. Um, my dad had a model train layout. We modeled O scale, so we were always building little towns. And in high school, um, I went to high school in Souderton, Pennsylvania, which is a distant suburb of Philadelphia. Um, and out there, it was pretty rural, and most students rarely, if ever, went into Philly. Um, but I would go in pretty regularly, and the city just fascinated me. The city fascinated me with the sights, the sounds, the tall buildings, being able to walk to things. Um, so I was just always obsessed with this concept, what made it different back home versus in the city, trying to figure it out. And being a planner, it's like that material in undergrad, when I took the intro course, I got a little better understanding.
Okay. But so you took an intro course to planning in your during your undergrad. Um, what what were you doing in college?
It's
Because
interesting.
it, it wasn't yeah.
It's interesting because um, my journey to becoming a planner, it wasn't linear, and that's why it's funny. It sounded linear in the beginning, right? It sounded I said I always knew I wanted to be a planner, and that's the truth. Um, in undergrad, I enrolled in Temple University at their Ambler campus in Ambler, Pennsylvania, and I enrolled with the major of community and regional planning, um, to be a planner. Took the intro course and urban design and a couple other electives in my first semester. Um, and it was in the environmental class when I remember the day we were talking about eco ducts, which are passageways under under interstate highways and under major roadways to allow wildlife migrations from one side of the road to the other without getting hit and
Mhm.
interfering with movement of vehicular traffic. Um,
Right.
we're talking about sustainability, kind of like just it was so focused on the environment that and my interest is so much in transportation that I felt like I was in the wrong field. It was one of those situations where I was like, maybe this isn't for me, and I actually changed my major to criminal justice.
So okay, the curriculum at Ambler had a heavy emphasis on environmental planning, but that's not what it was called.
Well, it was just the class. The
Oh,
class,
I see. I see. Okay.
yeah, it was the class
Oh,
because
okay.
it was in that class where I just thought I had the wrong understanding of planning up to that point. I just I just became
Yeah.
kind it scared me away from the
Right.
profession because I was thinking, you know, I just it was so I've never been interested in environmental concerns or issues. So that class was it was kind of shocking for me, and and it just made me think maybe this isn't for me because I just wasn't interested, and I just thought planning was all about saving the rainforests and saving the environment. And
Right.
um, at that
Yeah.
same semester, I took Intro to Criminal Justice um, out of curiosity, and I loved that class. I thought it was exciting. It just kind of felt more like more hands-on somehow. It caught my young adult attention and held it a lot more at the time. So I changed my major to criminal justice and graduated with a bachelor's in criminal justice. And now I'm working on my master's in urban planning.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That it's a very interesting path. I mean, not that they're unrelated necessarily, but um, it's I never actually met anyone before who started a career in one thing and then went back to school and switched gears to planning. And not that my trajectory is entirely different. I mean, I knew in school that like in my undergrad that's where I wanted to get to eventually, but I wound up doing a lot of other jobs in between. Um, but yeah, but your trajectory is pretty cool. Um, so I guess how long were you working in that criminal justice background, and sort of how did you go from school into that line of work, and then how long were you doing that for?
Well, I graduated from undergrad in 2010, and that was, of course, like at the height of the Great Recession. And there were no jobs.
Right.
So I started out working at a grocery store, um, and I was very grateful to be there because there was just
Mhm.
coming into adulthood at that time and never having really worked at a full-time job with benefits before. I didn't know, anybody graduating does you don't really know how to interview, you don't know how it works. I just remember going to human resources pages on different company websites and government websites, and they were just blank. And looking back, it's like that's not normal, but at the time that was our normal. Like they had just said job postings, please check back for postings. Whole, entire companies and organizations just a blank page, no jobs. And that was my normal. That was everybody's normal. If we never lived in a different world. So I worked at Giant, worked at Giant for like 2 years. Um,
Yeah.
and I took my first job in criminal justice was I'm working in a youth detention center in North Central Pennsylvania. That was the first job opening I found where I interviewed and they hired me. It was in Danville, Pennsylvania.
I
Um,
no idea. I
hours.
know where Butler is.
It's in Montour County, and not far
Mhm.
from Bloomsburg. Not far from Bloomsburg. Um,
Okay.
I went, took that job. I stayed in it for maybe 4 or 5 months. Just was not a good fit. Moved back to the Philly area and found another job that turned out to be a really great fit. I was a caseworker for the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services. Um, Originally, it was the Pennsylvania Department of Public Welfare. And I was, as a caseworker, I worked with families and individuals who were applying for public assistance programs. Um, did that
Nice.
job in different departments there for 10 years. Loved that job. But by year nine, I realized it's not what I wanted to do um, forever. I wanted to try different things. Where I really got my first real opportunity in the criminal justice field was after leaving DHS and moving to Florida in Orlando, where I was a probation officer. And believe it or not, a criminal justice degree, a bachelor's in criminal justice, you really being a probation officer is like that's like the cream of the crop. That's what you're looking for, that kind of role with a bachelor's in criminal justice. You don't need a bachelor's to be a police officer. You need a law degree to be an attorney. But with a bachelor's in criminal justice, it's really most ideal to try to be a probation or parole officer. So I did that for a year after moving here to Orlando. And even
Right.
though I personally thought I was a great fit for the job, like I loved the work, I loved dealing with the clients and dealing with the action and the drama and the arrests and just visiting people in prisons and jails here and going to testify in court, all of that stuff I'm very passionate about in the criminal justice like field. That's all very close to my heart. But while I thought I was a great fit for the job was not a great fit for me, if that makes sense. I felt like an awesome probation officer, but the red tape and the regulations and the politics just made it impossible to do the job effectively. Um, the deadlines, the organization's priorities and the probation officer's priorities. It almost is like a school teacher and the school district having their priorities and the teacher
Mhm.
wanting to help the kids and be there, for the kids and their families and try to build their futures. There was a big conflict
Right.
there for me, and so I had to leave the job, and it was time for a career change. That's when I realized criminal justice was not for me, and I looked back at my origins in planning, and I think maybe it was one of those situations where the stars aligned and I had this epiphany because coming from the Philadelphia area, Philadelphia being voted America's most walkable city by USA Today, I think that was in 2023, voted America's most walkable city. I moved to Orlando in 2021. That year, Smart Growth America they ranked Orlando number one most dangerous city for pedestrians. That
Yeah.
contrast going from the most walkable to the least walkable. When I came here, I was really shocked and overwhelmed and crippled with that culture shock. I just couldn't. I hadn't really learned to function in a city that didn't have a train or bus that goes everywhere. Um,
Yeah.
that actually awakened my interest again in urban planning. Really, most specifically, to name it most specifically, um, as working in social services and as a probation officer, in Philadelphia, I had become accustomed to people just being able to come to the office. I give them an appointment, same day or, in the future, say be here at 2 o'clock. Is that fine? And they would just appear. They just show up because the city has a mass transit system. In Orlando, as a probation officer, it blew my mind and it was really hard to get used to in the beginning when I would give someone an appointment. These are people in on probation and parole. A lot of them, a fair amount of them, have suspended driver's licenses related to their offenses, whether drunk driving, drug and alcohol. They get a suspended license. That means they can't drive. So when I would say, "Can you be here at 3 o'clock?" and they'd say, "I need to get a ride," like I had never heard that before.
Were people ever ask you for a ride?
um, I was never asked for a ride. I never was asked to like pick them up or anything. But it was
Yeah.
really hard in the beginning to comprehend that people can't get around. They can't get around. Um,
Yeah.
and it was so frustrating for me um, because I'm not used to that, and everybody else in the office was, and all the people, all the clients were, and to me it didn't make any sense. So I got the idea to go back to school because one of the employee benefits, they had an educational benefit where you could enroll and a lot of those costs would be covered. Um, so I'm like, now's the time if I want to go back and explore something else. And at the top of my list was urban planning. So let's give it another go.
Nice. Right. So you were mentioning sort of, I don't know if irritated is the right word. It's my word, not yours. But with the red tape,
Yeah.
And I, I'm curious about that that sort of bureaucracy, how much that transfers over to the
Mm,
planning world. Do you know what
mm,
I'm trying to say?
yeah. Yeah.
Like, could you, what's a good example in the criminal justice world of what that sort of, what's a good way of putting it? That sort of bureaucratic inertia that stops the right thing from happening, maybe.
Mm. One, the first thing that comes to mind is, um, well, it's hard not to get political because that is what red tape is, right? A lot of it is
Yeah, no,
political.
that's okay.
Um,
Yep.
Here in Florida, I can't speak on behalf of other states. Well, I can't. Well, it's hard to say. It has to do with voting, and each state has its restrictions on voting for people who have felonies, um, or who are in prison somewhere along the lines in the penal system. Each state has its own way of regulating that. In Florida, um, there was a huge, massive push from the um, from the governor's office to make sure that everyone in the state who's on probation and parole sign this form that says that it had like the rules and restrictions of voting while on parole and probation. And it was a very complicated form. Really, the rule is to put it simply is in Florida, if you have a felony, your probation or on felony probation, and you have fines, court fines that are unpaid and unreconciled. Generally, you would not be eligible to vote. Um, but it was just a lot of a lot of them didn't understand what their fine amounts were, or they weren't sure. There was kind of they were intimidated from voting. I would have preferred to sit down with each person and go over those things with them, but it was a very last
Mhm.
minute push, and most of them that it had the consequences of, like, what could happen if you violate the voting laws, and if you consider voter fraud. It scared a lot of people out of voting, and as a probation officer, I just didn't have the time or the resources to educate everybody on my caseload about who's eligible to vote this election, who's not. And that was very hard.
Right. So that's a big part of the job then is education and like letting letting these people who are on probation or parole, letting them know what they can and can't do.
Hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That that is that. There's also a parallel there. To planning work, I mean.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, it's kind of what the role of planner of the day is letting people
Hmm.
know what they can and can't do. You're not going to go back to jail
That's
if you get
true.
it wrong.
That's true.
But a lot of people don't understand. Um, Not only do they not understand what the laws or local regulations are, but they don't understand the process. Um,
Yeah, that's
and
true.
it's kind of what I'm trying to do here. It's
Hmm.
education, you know. Um, but yeah, so you were you were in that line of work for a while, and then what happened? You're working in probation in
Hmm.
Orlando, and then you decide that it's time to go back.
I uh I was so there were just these little there were these moments where I just was learning that the field of planning is where I belong. And there are
Mhm.
several examples um, that may speak to some of our listeners to help them learn if planning is where they belong, and that they're not in the field for them. For me, um, I remember complaining constantly about the built environment um, at our training site, which was in Tallahassee, the Tallahassee area. The campus was very sprawling campus. The campus was so large. that you had to drive from one end to the other in order to go to certain trainings. And we would carpool there. Um, and it was a few miles away from downtown Tallahassee. It was so rural. The nearest mailbox, there wasn't a mailbox on campus for for the students.
What?
You had to drive to the nearest post office to use the mailbox. That's just how the mail
You
was
mean like
handled.
you mean like the blue bin on the corner where you pull the handle and you put your mail
Yeah,
in?
they didn't have that. You had to. It was very
Whoa.
bizarre. Like it was a campus where it was very rural. It was sort of like a. It was sort of like it was a police academy essentially because people
Mhm.
probation officers in Florida and in a lot of states they go to very similar training as police officers do. So it was they had a campus. It was residential style living, but in order to mail a letter, they didn't. You had to drive to the post office, and there was no shuttle to downtown Tallahassee. I'm used to universities having shuttles that take people
Yeah.
places, but there you're just supposed to have a car. Um,
Mhm.
and explaining these things to classmates, they just didn't really understand. They just they didn't see the problem with that. Um, one thing that happened in the training class, in the classroom setting, we were talking about suspended driver's licenses for people on probation and parole, and how it's a very common offense to be rearrested for those driver's license for driving without a license while on probation and parole. Typically, that's a violation that would send someone back to prison. Any violation on probation is typically going back to incarceration. So the instructor was like, I don't, she said some really snide remark, like, I don't know why people are so dumb. They know they're on probation. They shouldn't drive. They should ride a bike. She said, because I said, well, how are they supposed to get around? She said, ride a bike. And I said,
Where?
that that set me off. And I went on this short rant about how Orlando, I said, do you know that Orlando is ranked number 1 for pedestrian fatalities here? And that the bike infrastructure is just not safe or appropriate for anyone to ride a bike. I'm like, this isn't Amsterdam, this isn't Portland. And everyone in class was just looking at me like, who, like, what?
Yeah. Like you're the crazy one. Yeah.
Yes, and when we would go to when we go to do home visits as a probation officer, you do home visits. Um, I you typically occasionally we do it with a partner. You know, it's a very law enforcement oriented kind of a job where you do home searches to make sure that people are following their probation and parole conditions. As we would go into their neighborhoods, I would always criticize the street widths and the home styles and the setbacks and how like ridiculous it is the apartment complexes how like I'm like the apartment complex garden apartment might be across a 4 or 5 lane highway from like a Dunkin' Donuts, and I'm like, if you want someone to get a job they have to literally walk across 5 lanes of fast moving traffic. That doesn't make sense. And my partner would like they would just look at me like they just don't get it. They don't care. Like what? Like they should. I'm like, you don't realize how much life is unlivable here without a car. And it was just things like that. Drives along the way to their neighborhoods where we go around a roundabout, or if we were going over over a highway overpass that was like a diverging diamond or something that caught my attention. I just started to realize more and more and more. I'm like, the things that are important to me aren't important to any of these people.
Yeah. And yeah, and they probably had never even considered it before, never even noticed any of those things. And I mean, you know, I don't know. I don't. I used to. Uh, I was binging 99% Invisible for a while. You know, do you know that podcast?
Mm-mm, no.
99
What's
PI.
this?
No, it's basically about the built environment, and it's all of the things in the built environment that you don't see or don't notice. Maybe you do see them, but you never knew what it was for, and you just kind of ignored it. Um, and so, but that's the point. It's the world around you is 99% invisible. in a lot of aspects of people's lives, they just have blinders on,
Uh-huh.
and they only
Uh-huh.
kind of see the things that matter to them.
Hmm.
I I don't know. It's hard to try to get into other people's heads, um, but yeah. All right, so um, working in criminal justice, you you decide to that you really need to be back in planning, and you um, you decide to go get your master's.
Hmm.
And so I guess, when did you start? Where are you now in that process? And when do you expect to be finished?
I started in fall of 2022, and I'll be wrapping up in the spring of 2025.
Nice. And
Yep.
how has the curriculum been so far? What have you been studying?
Um, I only have, so it's the curriculum is 14 classes. It's a 42 credit
Mhm.
program. It's the Masters of Science of Urban and Regional Planning at University of Central Florida in downtown Orlando, the downtown campus. And yeah, 14 classes. I only have four left to go. Um, so there's a core curriculum um, with intro, urban design, land use law, environmental planning, transportation policy, sustainable transportation, are a few of the courses I've taken so far, and global cities, managing community and economic development. I think I named all seven that I've taken so far. Um,
Nice.
um, oh wait, there's yeah, and I missed a few. That's not all seven because I've taken 10 so far. Um, but that's a handful of them. And this summer I'm taking a course at a different university for transfer credit. I'm taking shared and urban transport, um, or something like that for this summer. Um, shared and name of it escapes me. Shared and automated transport. Taking that from Florida Atlantic University online for the summer.
Okay,
Hmm.
that's
So my
that's
focus is
interesting.
transportation. You get three electives with this program. You get three electives. Um,
Mhm.
my one they only offer one transportation elective, and that's sustainable transportation. I believe that's the one. Um, because one is required, and they offer two transportation courses. One is required, and one is it could be an elective. So I've already taken the transportation elective, and I want to take a second transportation course. So I applied to be approved to take this course at FAU, the Shared and Automated Transport. Wrote a letter to the program department dean for UCF, um, who is the transportation instructor, coincidentally, knows my work, knows my papers and stuff. Said, of course, yeah, they approved it for me, and the university approved it. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that's cool. Um, what do you, I know you have a little bit of experience with automated transport. What do you think about that?
um, the little beep buses that you see around here,
Mhm. Yeah.
sometimes. um, I think we're gonna look back at that in like 10 years and think like that who thought that was going to work?
Uh, yeah.
They
Yeah.
have the
I don't.
capacity for what, like, really realistically, it's tighter. We People complain that airline seats are tight. If anybody's been on those beat buses, the seats it's like they're designed for a child. They're really very tight in there.
I'm trying to think of what to compare it to, and it's almost like. it's like bench seats on a subway, except that you have to wear a seatbelt. Um, and there's only room for 8 people. So
Eight very
you
small people.
yeah, I've been on the PRT in Morgantown, West Virginia, and
Hmm.
that those cars are really similar in size to the Butte shuttles, but they carry more people, like significantly more people. And there's no, well, I guess because it's fixed guideway and they don't need to have seatbelts because no one's going to crash into them except themselves. And I
Hmm.
think there are a bunch of fail safes to keep that from happening. Although I think it did happen once, but in any case, yeah, um, it's rare. It's just it's wild, and I don't I don't think the point is for them to be successful. I think the point is for them to get money.
Mm.
Um, I mean, there's something useful in there. It's just not transportation.
Hmm.
It's not moving. It's not moving people around. I'm sure like the lidar systems that they use are valuable, and it's a good way to test them. But I don't. They're just sucking up funding, and they're not producing anything.
You think maybe it's interesting. Each one of these courses that's not transportation related gives me a new perspective on planning. Before I enrolled in the master's program, and before I took it as undergrad, and fortunately in undergrad, I took enough courses to be able to claim it as my minor. They didn't actually have a minor at Temple at the time, and I don't think they do either at now. But I took a fair amount, a handful of planning courses, and at that time, when I first started those classes, I think the reason I was so shocked by the environmental course is because I thought transportation was all planning was. I didn't know that it was so broad. I didn't know that there were so many elements. Elements is the right word because that's your comp plan, right? The only element that I was aware of or interested in ever was transportation, and
Mm,
how people move around a city and the land uses and urban design. From my perspective, transportation was the nucleus of all of it. Like, how can we build a city where people can't walk? How can we get build a city where people with disabilities can't move around? They need to have a car. People get in a car crash and they're traumatized for the rest of their lives. Now they can't function in our cities because of our single mode transportation system that's surrounded around the car. So, like, with these courses that I'm taking that are not transportation, which is all but a few of them, I'm really learning how it all connects. And fortunately, the classes for the most part, they give the students the flexibility to connect the subject matter with what they're most interested in. For example, I in my environmental class at the master's level, I entered with a ton of trepidation because not only is it a master's class, a master's program, but it's the environmental class that scared me away from the
right.
field in undergrad. So I went in taking like deep breaths and saying, Austin, you're not, don't do this a second time. This is like round two. You're going to you're going to conquer this and look at this with an open mind. I had kind of the shock from undergrad of the environment being a part of planning. I had that in my back pocket. It's like, okay, that shock is gone. The sticker shock is gone. Now we got to move through it. And my professor, she was so great. She gave us the freedom to connect the environment with things we were interested in. So I was able to write papers about how a transportation system that's centered around cars and highways, what environmental impacts that causes, to air quality and noise pollution and things that I hadn't really considered before. It kind of opened my mind to see transportation from a little different way about how we could plan transportation systems better that actually improve human health and protect the environment and maintain open space and don't waste space with highways and I like how the program has, like, I still see transportation as the nucleus of planning, but I'm now able to find the other pieces, the key components that can't be left out. So all that to say, I say all that to bridge it back to the beat buses, believe it or not.
Okay, here we go.
And in saying that, you said, the purpose of those beat buses is it's most likely not moving a people around because it's not very efficient. But I'm taking a managing community and economic development course right now and learning about the different strategies for community and economic development. Um, and one of our topics is the smart city and smart technology. And it's kind of a fad of
Yeah.
or a trend for cities to jump on this smart technology bandwagon and show off, like on brochures. Look, we have a autonomous vehicle. We're cutting edge, and that's like, wow. It just it can
Mayors
drive, I'm sure. Yeah,
mayors love it.
a feather in
Mayors
their
love it.
cap. Look how cool we are. We have smart technology.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so over the fads. You know, it's there's like it's like every 5 years there has to be a new one that everyone's going to talk about and everybody's going to pour a bunch of time and energy into, and it doesn't change anything meaningful. um, yeah. Um, yeah. Your your talk about environmental classes had me my my master's program was also very heavily in, there's a heavy focus on environmental planning, and that's because in the Australian state that I was going to school in, um, that is really a big part of the state planning statutes are have been built around environmental planning, and it's not so different here, um, in terms of like there are different issues because like the geology is different, and the climate's different in some parts of the state, but um, like the legal mechanisms and the reasons for having those laws are pretty similar, like the foundation of it. But I I had to take my environmental planning class twice because I failed it the first time. Not proud of
Really?
it, but oh, it was brutal. And the final is what, like, I wasn't doing well in it, but the final just killed me. Um, and yeah, I had to retake it over the summer. It was terrible. Um, but yeah, and it's not that I don't care about it. It's just like I was never really that interested in it because
Mhm.
I don't. My interest has always been land use and transportation.
Yeah.
So um, and within that, it's I'm more interested in redeveloping urban areas
Uh-huh.
where that level of environmental review, where you're you're doing your tree surveys and your wetland surveys, and those things might still get done, but at, they're not happening before the demolition,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
You're not um, you're not doing any of that stuff before you're redeveloping. So yeah, a little PTSD there from when it comes to
Well,
environmental planning.
for me, like, honestly, I have to give credit to the UCF environmental planning course. I'm going to give a
Mhm.
shout out to Dr. Knox. Dr. Knox is really, people go into her class um, not caring about the environment at all. And I think her goal isn't to turn you into an environmentalist, but to get you to see it from a different point of view. Like, I think a lot of us go into environmental courses as planners, maybe if we're, if we've never thought about the environment before, it's very like just to consider, like remember like the 90s educational programming like Captain Planet. Like Captain Planet and Earth Day, that was really all I really knew about the environment. If you go into these courses thinking the environment, like protecting the environment or the benefits of the environment, is all it is recycling, making sure you separate your recyclables and don't litter. Like that's all I thought about the environment. Um, or saving the rainforest. It's either like those small things that are meaningless or these big things like saving the rainforest, saving endangered species.
Mhm.
And it's so much more than that. And through that class, one of the assignments was to connect the environment to a field that is not your forte. So if you had an undergraduate major that was in something, um, you weren't allowed to, or you were discouraged at least from connecting it to things you already know. So I chose to connect the environment to human health, and
Mhm.
that's where that's where I saw how the connection between human health and the environment. Um, and it was really it like blew me away. It allowed me to just see how the built environment can impact human behavior, and how it can just be calming. Like I read the research about how patients in hospitals, studies looked at patients with the same conditions were more likely to recover faster if they had a room with a window that looked out to trees. Things like that. If there were plants in the room, um, children's behavior if the playground has trees, versus if it's an urban playground that does not have trees in the streetscape. Just the streets that do have trees versus don't have trees, providing the benefit of shade into the houses on those streets. The urban heat island effect, like we talk about global warming, and there's of course the climate change deniers and things like that. But beyond that trivial, it's happening or it isn't happening. I feel like what's missed in the general discussion is the benefits, and the detriments of just having a street where it's going to be a hotter summer. It's like the big picture of melting ice caps just totally misses how it affects people at the local level. If you've got trees on your street, it's like you can totally disregard the climate change discussion if you just reframe it to, if you live on an urban street that has trees in it that provide shade to your home, you're going to have lower energy costs, versus if you have a street that has no trees on it, you are going to pay more for cooling your home in the summer. Just basic things like that in this environmental planning class have just completely reframed how I look at trees and green space and the environment.
Yeah, yeah. I don't. Yeah, I don't understand um, what people are thinking when they do that, because you see that a lot. There- People are there are a lot of older people in my neighborhood, and they're doing what old people do, um, and so there are a lot of like younger families moving in, and the first thing people do is like cut down the trees, and there are a lot of a lot of mature oaks too, and um, I kind of, in some regards, I get it. Like with hurricanes, we're not we're not going to have real flooding here unless you live in the floodplain. Um, but the storm damage comes from trees falling over, or branches falling on your house. So if you've got a tree right up against your house, yeah, that's kind of obvious. But people down the street um, are trying to. They already came and they tore. I don't. I don't know if you've been here before, but a lot of people have like xeriscaped front yards. I think there was a period where the city of Orlando was paying people to tear out their lawns, and Um, and we don't have reclaimed water in this neighborhood. Um, but it's around here. It's just not here yet. Um, but yeah, so there are a lot of people with xeriscaped yards, and this house down the street from me used to be one of them. The first thing these people did was tear out all of the fruit trees, and all of the milkweed and all that stuff, and then they just put in sod, and they basically planted a couple of bushes, and they went from having this really natural looking yard with a lot of shade to like a an ornament. you know,
Mhm.
I I don't. Yeah, we could really go down the rabbit hole on that one, I guess, because it's a lot about like what a home is to people,
Yeah.
you know, um, and and what the there's also an interesting conversation there too to be had about like culturally how the sort of traditional American front yard is like an extension of the public realm. It's private, but it's open, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
and
Hmm.
and then you get but then you get like different cultures where they will wall in their front yard and you can't see it from the street. Um,
Hmm.
and you see that here too. And it's technically illegal to have uh, like really tall hedges in your front yard. I think the height limit is supposed to be 4 feet, so that you can see over it. Um, and
It
they're obvious.
depends. Yeah, it's not that way in all jurisdictions,
No, it
but
isn't.
could
But here
be.
it is.
But yeah, could be. Yeah.
Um, but yeah. All right. So so
But that's
anyway,
a good point,
you're
though.
yeah.
That's a good point, though. Like, about, I thought about that too, because not only are lawns extremely wasteful, but there's cultural norms that come with lawns. Like, this space, it's like the cultural norms. You're not supposed to have picnics on your front lawn, or a barbecue on your front lawn. It looks out of place. It's like that's supposed to go in your backyard. So you not only have a front yard that's just to look at. It's like that. It's like that living room that no one sits in.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah,
just there. It's
yeah,
just there to look pretty. I don't like that. I just think, like, why do we? It's just so wasteful. And the thing is, it's so ingrained in American culture. It's undeniable. We all know it. To have to just aspire to have this lawn, just to say you have it. But then
yeah.
I
I
have
know.
friends and
To have this
I
really,
have friends and people I know who they buy a house and they're so excited to have a house with this big lawn, and then all their weekends are spent mowing it and buying
yeah,
gas for their mower and investing in these big lawn mowers. And I'm just like, that's not my goal in life to do that for the lifetime of the house. And if, someone's like, well, just, hire someone to do it. Now I have income going to this lawn that's just to look at. To me, that's just crazy waste of my own hard-earned money. But to each his own.
yeah. It yeah. Speaking of which, interesting aside here. I got a zoning notice in the mail recently. Neighbors around the corner, they've had they've had a fire pit in their front yard for a long time, which is not unusual in this neighborhood. Lots of people do it, and they'll have chairs out front. And but I think what they did, why they got a code violation, is because the their yard it um, it slopes up to down, like going north to south. It slopes down, and they put in some railroad ties and they filled it so that it's level. And
Yeah.
then they put gravel down, and then they put their fire pit and they put their chairs out there. And they do, to be fair, they spend a lot of time out there for 7 8 months a year. I see them out there almost every weekend, and I I don't I don't know who had a problem with it, or if someone called code, or if it was just a drive by. The drive by code enforcement is super rare. I've had conversations with the city, and they basically refused to do plain sight code violations. So I don't know what happened there. It wasn't me, but um, but it's yeah. I mean, it is. I know why they do it. It's because their house is the lot that their house is on seemed like it was kind of an afterthought when they were building the neighborhood, and it's really small. I think their backyard is really small, and there's not enough room to do that kind of thing back there. Whatever fire they had going on would be too close to the house. But yeah, I mean they've got to go through um, to the ZBA to sort of get all that stuff legalized. But they also want to add a gravel driveway, which I didn't even realize was not permitted. Um, that seems extra silly. Like, why would you? And this is going back to sort of environmental planning. Why would you want people to add impervious surface when if they didn't have to, right? You should be encouraging people to have. I know it's not going to be like 100% porous, a gravel driveway, because you're still going to have compaction. So there's going to be some runoff, but compared to like a concrete driveway, gravel driveway would be pretty minimal runoff. Um, yeah, I don't. So much of the code in so many places that I've worked has just been antiquated and weird, and I don't. Um, it's it's like a set of rules that evolve, and when I read it, sometimes I think that it was like from the maybe late 50s to the early 90s, and then it just kind of ossified there and never changed, which again is also weird because we have to update those things every 7 years by statute. So
Yeah, yeah.
um, we have to do those ear-based amendments. Um, but um, yeah, so um, you're halfway, a little bit more than halfway done with your program. Um,
Yeah, three-quarters there.
nice. Um,
71%. I've been doing I divided the credits.
so do you want to talk at all about your work experience? Like maybe what you've thought about the sort of the academic version, and your sort of vision of what planning was before you started studying, and then what the realities were.
Hmm.
And you pull punches or don't,
Hmm.
if you want. It's up to you.
Well, let's see. My my experience in the field so far has been my internship. Um, I'm here in Orlando, but I did my internship in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, in Norristown, which is Montgomery County is adjacent to Philadelphia County, just a stone's throw from Philly. Um, and that office was um, big, had over 40 planners. I think they had 50 some planners, and they're for the whole county. And in Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, um, I guess I can't speak for all 67 counties, but Montgomery County, the planners kind of they are the planners for the local municipalities. So it's kind of cool. I thought that each planner had their own like little handful of communities that they helped plan and worked on those comp plans and did even um, some level of development review. Um, I love the
Is that
internship.
is that statutory? Like, is that the way it has to work?
I'm not
Like, could it
sure.
could a city have its own planning department?
I'm not sure how that works. I'm not sure how that works. It'd be
Hmm.
interesting to find out what the statute says about it. I know
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, they divide cities into classes based on their population. Um,
Right. Right.
they have the Philadelphia being the only city of the first class, and then they have based on population, city of the second class and city of the third class. And they have their own different rules of what they can do.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I have a very limited municipal planning experience in Pennsylvania because I was working at the NPO. So I didn't,
mhm,
you know,
that's right.
I never got into that stuff, and I only paid attention to it insofar as it was related to a grant that we were working on. Um, but most of the stuff that I was doing was on the New Jersey side anyway.
Hmm.
Um, so huge planning department is what it sounds like. And what's the Montgomery County's like 700,000, 800,000 people? I have
I'm
no
not
idea.
sure their population. Yeah,
Because that's a big. Do they? Is it planning and zoning? Is all that stuff handled sort of through the same team?
they they go out. They go out and they attend the meetings with the local zoning boards and the local steering committees, and they there's this division of responsibilities, and I don't know. I don't know if it's standard across all of the municipalities in the county, but it seems like this kind of cool cooperative effort to plan the community and work on the comp plan. It felt like the county planner was acted as like facilitator and organizer in a lot of the public outreach and things like that, and just kind of almost like being a support for the local communities. I really liked that about it. It was a very fast-paced office, a lot of projects, a lot. It was just meetings all day with about different projects with different stakeholders. Um, I loved it. I had a real blast.
Did, did the planners there? Do they get assigned to a borough? Is that how they
They
run that?
they got assigned to um, like a little handful of boroughs and
Mhm.
townships.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense. You really need to be on top of it. If they had you spread all over the whole county, stuff would fall
Hmm.
through the cracks, probably for sure. Um, yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Um, see, yeah, have you seen a difference between the sort of academic side and then the realities of the planning world?
I think that like it's it's so hard to say because that internship was 8 weeks, and that's so bite-sized. Um,
Mhm.
that was just that was the length of their program, was an 8 week internship, and my biggest project was I did outreach. I developed the outreach event to promote the 2050 plan, the 2050 comp plan, and I developed me and the other intern there and I worked together collaboratively to kind of come up with some idea to engage the public. At this outdoor event, there was this community fair. It was National Night Out, it was called, in Norristown. Um, National Night Out 2023. And there was just, there were tents everywhere and they had food and music. And we had a booth there. And the idea we came up with was we had four poster boards on easels. No, we had two. We had two poster boards on easels, and they were divided in half to give the seasons. So we had spring, summer, and then fall, winter. And we asked the participants to put a sticker dot because planners love stickers. We asked them to put a sticker on a green sticker for their favorite season in the county and to explain why they
Mhm.
love it so much, and a red sticker on their least favorite season in the county and how it could be made better. Um, we kind of led the discussion and said, don't just tell us you don't like it. Tell us what would make it more fun. What would make it easier. And the answers were actually really interesting. And then as soon as people started coming up and gathering around the boards, they started talking to each other about, maybe some parks they like and different events they like in their neighborhoods. And um, one of the most one of the most memorable like conversations I had when someone was putting their favorite and least favorite. I remember someone would say, like someone said something along the lines of, my least favorite season is winter. And I said, tell me a little more about that. And she said something like, because I ride my bike, I like to ride my bike to work, or I like to ride my bike around the park. And when it snows, they never shovel the paths. And I was thinking, I said, that's the kind of information we're looking for, so we can fix these problems.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was in Philly, my bike went in the basement, like usually in December, and it didn't come back out until probably late March, early April. I'm not gonna lie,
Hmm.
I couldn't do it. It was either too cold or like when there's snow on the ground, which is not all the time, but
Hmm.
when it happens, it's even the streets get plowed, but they don't get plowed in their entirety, and then people are shoveling out their parking space, and then they're throwing the snow in the street, and it turns into a
Hmm.
big ice patch. You know, um,
Hmm.
yeah, it's no one no one wants that to wipe out on your way home from work. Um, all right, um, so yeah, you're going to be graduating soon. Um, you're going to be out there in the world of planning. What Where are you looking to take your career? Sort of, there's so many different options planning wise. There's so many different paths you can go down. What
Hmm.
What are you looking to get into? And well, yeah, that's it for now. where where do you want your career to go? Like in terms of the the type of planning,
I'm, of course, hyper focused on transportation planning. Um,
right?
I am passionate about multimodal transportation planning. I want to be a part of an office that actually embraces the idea of having transportation systems that don't leave people behind, that think of people's needs, um, with complete streets kinds of concepts that give people that just think of others. Like I think I can't speak on behalf of every planner, but I approach the profession with a lot of empathy and thinking for others, and I do it all the time. Like when I go to cross a street on foot and I just push the button or something, um, and there's no like voice system and there's no sound or anything, I just think to myself, wow, this would be a really hard street to cross if I were blind. And it just kind of makes me mad. Like
Yeah.
I have to kind of reel that in just to just to get through the day. But I think about that's how I see the world. I always think about, you know, they kind of forgot about this person when they planned this. Or if I'm crossing the street and
Yeah.
you know, 2 seconds later the countdown starts, I'm like, wow, it's a good thing I'm, in decent shape and I don't have trouble walking, because otherwise I wouldn't have enough time to cross.
So hey, when my old job, when I was driving to work, um, I would I would get on I-4 and I would go through that. Oh, are you good?
Something says there's a connection issue with the USB device.
Oh, okay.
I think I just
You're
unplug
fine.
it. Okay. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I still hear you. Your camera's off though, um, but it's also
Oh, I
showing.
see.
No, you
Oh,
know
I
what?
know what
It's
it's
saying that
doing.
your network quality dropped down to my level, so we have two poor
I can
connections.
fix it. I can fix it right now. Let's try it now.
All
There we
right,
go.
you do that.
Oh, can you
I'll
see me
tell a
now?
little story. Um, all right,
Okay.
you're good.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're back. Um, yep. Um, so yeah, I was driving to work, And every day at the same time, there's this blind guy who was crossing the street at Princeton and North Orange. And that's not the worst intersection around here, but it's not great. And if you like if you're relying on everyone else paying attention for your safety, you're not in a good position, um, especially around here. So I was scrolling through the tip recently, and I saw intersection improvements because there's a ton of money now for Vision Zero, and everybody's making intersection improvements at these deadly intersections. And I saw this change, and this is um, it's a state road, so this is like it's an FDOT project, and they're they're bringing out the curb. I wouldn't really call it a bump out, but uh, they're making
Mm-hmm.
a tighter turn radius, basically, which is good, except that they moved the crosswalk away from the corner. So they moved it like I want to say like 20 or
Mm-hmm.
30 feet back from the corner. And the building on that corner comes all the way out to the corner. It's totally blind. So when you're approaching that corner, you cannot see
Mm-hmm.
what's around the corner. And your that design choice is relying on people taking that corner slowly and then expecting something or someone to be
Right.
immediately around that corner. And and I I have very low confidence that
Mm-hmm.
someone is not going to get hit in that crosswalk. I mean, I think the only good part about that is that people will probably be going under 20
Mm-hmm.
miles an hour when that happens. But I, yeah. Um, but I understand completely where you're coming from about people
Yeah.
not getting left behind uh, with transportation, or by through our transportation implementation and
Mm-hmm.
design choices. But um, but yeah, did you want to say more about that?
Yeah.
Sorry to um, interrupt there.
Um, just that I guess part of part of the part of the push for me, or the affirmation for me, for getting into planning at, like, officially, was that I felt like the only people I could even talk to about this stuff are planners. And I just realized I'm like not, like, I'm not, it just makes you feel like, I don't know if you're into Harry Potter or something, but it's like finding out you're a wizard. And then you need to go to Hogwarts for people who understand you.
Yeah, yeah. It took me. Uh, I was I was really annoying the shit out of people who
Uh-huh.
just didn't care
Yeah.
for a long time
Yeah.
until
Uh-huh.
I found my people.
They just
Yeah,
don't understand. They don't understand, they don't get it.
yeah. But but, but now it's gotten to the point where, for me anyway, where I I went to this community meeting. That's probably about a month ago for a bike ped project on Conway, and where it's a 5 lane strode. You can't really call it a strode because there's no shopping there. It's a 5 lane highway running through a residential neighborhood, and people are
Mhm.
going 60, 70 miles an hour. There's just kids have to cross that road to get to school because the elementary school's on the other side. And um, the original design was actually really good, but people in the neighborhood adjacent to it flipped out about being able to turn left wherever they wanted to. And the compromise is considerably more dangerous than what the original design was. It's safer than what's there now, but that's that's really saying nothing. Um, anyway, I went to the first meeting. I went to the third meeting, and within like 30 minutes of being there, I'm like, I just feel like I'm at work and I want to go home.
Hmm.
I don't want to be here right now. Um, so,
Hmm.
yeah, I, I don't. It's tough to like do the work
Oh,
and then also be engaged in the
yeah.
process when you're at home. You know, you know, because especially because where I live and where I work
Right.
are not the same place, and I I think that if if it was the same, it would be even more of a problem.
Hmm.
Because I'm like,
Yeah,
I work there, and like I have to draw the line between what's professional and what's personal. Um, so yeah, I've I've thought about that quite a bit recently. Um, so yeah, maybe I think I'm glad that I wound up where I am right now and not working for the city, because I think that would be like a moral crisis for me. Not being able to run my not
that's
feeling free to
true.
run my mouth at meetings,
That's
um,
true.
as the um, but yeah, okay, so um, sorry, you you really want to you really want to get into transportation. I mean, I kind of knew that, um, but um, what do you have an idea of where you want that to go? Like where any particular area of interest, like a focus, or um, some big
Hmm.
project. Like I know over the last couple of years, there's been a few things that I've really wanted to get done, and I've at my last job I couldn't. Um, but now I have the opportunity. Now I have the opportunity to do it. So I'm, I've only been there, it's not very long, and I'm already making some good headway on it. So hopefully within a year, it'll be at the board. But like what are you what what are you looking to accomplish? I guess like a-
I know
anything.
that I know that I really want and maybe need to be in an environment where there's a culture that is embraces my ideas about like Vision Zero and equitable transportation planning, where I won't be in an office where other people they just talk the talk but they don't walk the walk. Like, don't just fall
Mm,
victim to what the residents and the NIMBYs are, kicking and screaming for. Um, One thing I said at the internship was that as planners, we're like doctors for cities. You know, we have to be respectful with our constituents, just like a doctor should be respectful with a patient. Like, to put it in the perspective of a doctor, medical professionals, they work with sick people or they work with people in all phases of their human health.
mhm.
I would be a very bad doctor if I were to chastise and put patients down who were chronic smokers or who had an alcohol problem. My job is to give them advice. My job is to give them the best medical advice possible and discourage unhealthy behaviors, while being respectful. It's not just giving in to what they want or telling them what they want to hear. You know, as a doctor, I wouldn't tell someone that eating fast food is a good idea, um, even though it might save them time if they got a busy lifestyle. As a doctor, I'm supposed to understand. However, it's still not good for your body, or here are the long-term consequences. As a planner, I'm going to be dealing with people who want a place to park at and at all. That is their number one priority, is to have a place to park, or to have a quiet neighborhood in their single family home, or live in a world where nobody rents. um, as a planner, my responsibility is to give them the guidance to understand what's healthy for a community, what is healthy for the long term vision, what's healthy for the future generations, and not cave to people pleasing, not cave to, you know, promising unlimited parking for all. you know, I feel like that's very important. And I want to be in an office where the staff share that belief that it's important to stand by the ethics of the profession and fight to have that equitability um, in our planning practices, and stand up for having plans that think of everybody. If I can be in that office situation, I think I would thrive. If I'm in an office where people think with 1960s views of planning, and I feel like that's a constant uphill battle where the zoning codes still have the spirit of 1960s or 70s planning, I wouldn't do very well in that kind of a culture. So that's where I want to be, is somewhere that's progressive and thinks of everyone.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. I guess you know what what I've run into are the patients, the smokers, who hear your advice, say you don't know what you're talking about. I'm gonna keep smoking. You know, um, everybody is. It's like during the pandemic, everybody became an
Uh-huh.
epidemiologist, um, and the world is just full of planners. The world is full of planning experts. Every community meeting is 50 to 100
Uh-huh.
experts telling you
Uh-huh.
why you're wrong. Um, yeah, I have one tomorrow night. I'm not looking forward to it. It's going to be ugly. Um, but yeah, I'm just going to kind of. Luckily, I'm not presenting, so I'm just going to find something the same color as my shirt so that I can blend into the background. I'm just going to hide. Um, yeah. So, what do you think? What do you think the future holds? Like, are you? Do you think when you graduate that you'll wind up moving? Are you gonna, or like, are you looking for a place to work, or are you gonna go where the work is? I guess is what I'm
Well,
asking.
before I go there, I just thought about when you were talking about the experts.
Hmm.
You know, real estate
Yeah,
real
yeah.
estate
Go
agents
ahead.
are so guilty of that. Like, I was watching a YouTube video where
Yeah,
they were
yeah,
talking about moving to Lake Nona and why you should move to Lake Nona, and they were trying to downplay complaints about traffic, and they were talking about, the real estate agent was saying, how they're conveniently located to this roadway and this roadway and this highway. You know, down here, apartments and real estate, they sell it by saying we're conveniently located to highways. Um, and the real estate agent was saying, and not only that, but they're going to be expanding the roadway, adding two additional lanes. So we expect traffic to flow more freely. I'm like, okay, you're a transportation expert now.
man. Yeah, you know, I hear people talk about Lake Nona a lot, and the two big things for me were always the location being basically far from everything. I mean, I don't. What year did you move
2021 in the
here?
fall.
Okay, so Yeah, when I first moved here, which would have been 2018, um, there was nothing there. There were like a couple of neighborhoods that were built, but that like downtown Lake Nona, it didn't exist yet. It's been pretty wild to watch it be built, and when it's finished, I'm sure it'll be great, right? But it doesn't. Even when it is, you're still
Yeah,
going to have to leave there
yeah.
for some things, and you're still going to be far from everything. And I mean, it's a growing metro area. You would expect new development to happen there, and it's not terrible. Like it's a lot. It, it's good, and it definitely could have been way worse. But the traffic, the distance from everything else, and the jet noise.
Yeah.
Holy crap! Like it's bad enough at my house. I don't. Do you hear much of it where
Mm,
you are?
you know what? Yeah,
The
actually,
planes.
I'm in Winter Park. It's there's the planes go right over Winter Park, but it's not very loud. Maybe because of their altitude. But yeah, like we have to be in a direct flight path. Now
Right.
that you point that out, I just thought of that.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too about Lake Nona is like the proximity to the airport, right? Like everybody talks about Atlanta being the busiest airport, but I don't know if we talked about this before, but um, Orlando is the second busiest O&D airport
Hmm.
after LAX. So like 93% of the traffic that goes in and out of Orlando is people boarding in Orlando.
Right,
Like they're
right.
not changing planes. If you're in Atlanta, yeah, there's a ton of people at that going through that airport, but they're going through the airport. They never go
Hmm.
through security. They never leave the airport. They're
Yeah.
just changing planes, so they don't have to deal with the traffic, um, and the lines and security, as as you well know. Um, but but yeah, Lake Nona. The crazy. I don't know if I can share my screen. It might be worth looking at, but well, I'd have to find it first. But um, there, um, Brightline and Sunrail are building that extension from the airport out to the Sunrail main line for the
Yeah.
Sunshine Corridor, right? That's what they're
Yes.
calling it now. But that spur that goes to the airport, it's already built, and it actually goes all the way around the airport out to the old coal plant that's now a gas plant, um, and it goes right through Lake Nona. It's literally like just on the other side of 417, and um, it's I mean it's wild to me that planning for it isn't further along than it is. Because like the city owns it. Like they, you literally have this like municipally owned rail line that gets used like once a month. And I think Brightline rebuilt part of it so that they could do construction out on
Hmm.
the Cocoa line. But anyway, yeah, I don't. Uh, I wish I got more of the decision, understood more of the decisions that get made around transportation planning. I don't. Yeah, I don't. The only, you know, try not to be overly negative, but the bright spot is that Jerry Demings is the mayor of Orange County, is really trying to get um, the transportation tax passed, which will make a huge difference in terms of Sunrail.
Hmm.
Um, but we'll see what happens in
If
November.
Sunrail ran
Um,
on weekends, it would be a total game changer for this region, especially with getting to perhaps even getting to the airport because there are, of course, there's frequent links service. I don't know enough to say if it qualifies to be a BRT. Probably not, but they have like every 10 minutes, there's like 10, 15 minutes, there's a bus from Sand Lake Road Station to the airport that I've used on weekdays. Um, it would get people to all the festivals and stuff. Winter Park always wants to throw, where people currently they flood in
oh,
their cars.
Yeah, and you're having that. It's this weekend,
Uh-huh.
right? The art
And it's
festival.
crazy. People don't they don't have enough room for their car.
I haven't. Yeah, I was thinking about that last year, and it's not something that ever plan to go to, but sometimes I go to the hardware store or like, to Trader Joe's or whatever, and you're like, holy crap, what
Yeah.
is all this traffic? Um, why they don't run shuttle buses from remote places? It's
Mhm.
crazy. Or like they've run special trains for Sunrail
For
for other
sporting
things.
events and
It wouldn't be crazy. Yeah. Why why can't you run it for the art festival? And you don't even have to run it full service. Just run a
yeah.
train once an hour or even every 90 minutes would make a
Uh-huh.
huge difference.
Yeah, because it was just so congested. It's literally like the just that part of the region just gets clogged with people frantically looking for
Mhm.
parking. I just think it's inexcusable that that's the only way to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty nuts. Yeah, I don't it's I think people I know I've said this to you before, but I think here that only very recently did people come to the realization that this is not a small
Uh-huh.
town anymore. For like the last 40 or 50 years, people have just been like, oh, it's a small town. People come to visit because of Disney. Oh, it's a small town. Like it, we're just about done growing. And no one no one ever thought that like, oh, there's going to be 3 million or 4 million people here. We need more infrastructure. And like this is going to be the third time that the transit tax is
Mm,
on the ballot. So like something is happening. It's just, like 15 years. I don't want to say it's too late. It's never too late, but it should have happened 15 years ago. But culturally, I don't, I think it wasn't there
mhm.
yet. And it's only really recently that it's been, man, I get so irritated when I think about the first ballot measure only failed by, it was like 52 to 48 or something like that. If they had if they had put a little bit more time and effort into explaining what they were doing
Mhm.
and why and what the benefits would be, I yeah, I think we would have it already. And um, anyway, yeah. So um, yeah. So sorry. I was asking. Like, do you think you'll wind up staying here? Is there like a place that you want to be? Or is are you going to go where the work is? I mean, and that's how
Uh-huh.
I wound up here because it's
Yeah.
where the work is, and uh, it's it can be tough, especially like when you get into it, like what you were talking about before, coming out of school in
Yeah.
2010 and the job market just being garbage.
It's even though people have told me since I came here with all my complaints about the lack of transportation infrastructure and the unwalkable land use and urban design, people frequently said, you should have seen it 2 years ago. So, I mean, those are signs, those are good signs. Like, even just the underpass on Livingston Street in downtown Orlando under I-4, I was like, that's hideous. And people were like, you should have
Right.
seen it 2 years ago. So I mean, there's definitely a lot of I think there's a bright future for a lot of things in Orlando, in Orange County. It's
Mhm.
just for me, it's funny when you go into America's newest cities, it feels like you're like losing progress because there's so much infrastructure that you just lose. Since I came here, I've looked at the cities in the Northeast and the Northeast megalopolis, the Northeast corridor, with totally new eyes, and the people there just don't even see all that they have. Like going to Moynihan Train Hall in New York City,
Mhm.
just to see the hustle and bustle and the soaring ceilings and just the people and the train departures and all the things just within arm's reach, walking distance. You don't have to take a car. If you're in New York and you need to go to Philadelphia for anything, you just get on a train. Like those things are just so simple and effortless. If you land at BWI airport and you need to get to Baltimore or Washington D.C., you just get on a train. It's right there. Philadelphia has train connections to the airports. Like the train connections to airports, that's something that's totally taken for granted. So like the question of if I want to
Yeah.
stay here, that is just such a terrifying thought to give up all of those things that I have always had and always known. I just I miss it so much. I do not want to stay here.
Yeah.
It would take an
Mhm.
opportunity, like the stakes are high. It would take an opportunity that would truly benefit my resume and my long-term career goals. If I get a transportation planning position here that I can really, you know, do well in and build those skills, I would consider staying here. Um, but
Mhm.
it's very uncomfortable for me here. I came with an open mind and thought that I could be adaptable, but I have not adapted well. I really haven't adapted well. Some people they're very adaptable. Like I have a professor in one of my courses. She's Chinese. She's from China. She lived in China for most of her adult life, and then she came here and she moved to Atlanta from a from a Chinese city. And by our standards, they're all enormous mega cities. She said one of the biggest shocks for her when she came here
Mhm.
was how Americans measure big cities, and when people would call Atlanta a major city, she it was like confusing for her because they're all like they're all like small towns. She's from cities with millions and millions of people.
Yeah.
Um, but I look at her and I'm like, you've adapted.
Y-
You've adapted. You stayed here. And I said, I don't know how you did that because her transition was so much greater in size and breadth than mine. I'm coming from, a region that has some trains and, a couple extra million people, a little more density, and I'm just falling apart down here. I don't know. People come from like first world, like first class infrastructure and do okay here where you have to drive to everything. So I don't know. I don't want to stay here. I have to do a real
Yeah.
cost benefit analysis. I might have to do a what do you call it? A SWOT analysis.
Uh, yeah. Yeah. That's a wild story too because you're moving here from China. You're basically dividing by four, right? Like whatever big city is there, like Atlanta would be the equivalent of like I, I like Harbin or something. I don't know. You know, um, shoot, what's the one that's like it's next to Hong Kong, but it's not Hong Kong? Is it Guangzhou?
I don't
Um,
know.
I don't. It's a huge city that's like three times the size of Atlanta, but you move to Atlanta and then you move from Atlanta to here, which
Yeah.
is like one third the size of Atlanta. Um, so yeah, yeah, it's tough. Um, yeah, this is it's sort of an interesting comparison when I was living in Australia. There were no Australians who lived downtown. Like almost everyone there was a
Mm,
foreigner. Um, and like even even for me, um, I didn't. Downtown's expensive. The CBD in Brisbane and basically all Australian cities, and I'm like, well, I can't afford to live there. As much as nice as it would be to be central and be a quick train or bus ride to everywhere. So I, I was out in the suburbs, but not very far, just a couple of miles, and um, I everybody was everybody was very surprised that I was living where I was living. Um, and I don't. It's not something that I looked into before I got there, um, but um, it's just it's always interesting, like what like where people choose to move, like where they're coming from, and like where they wind up. Like someone from a big city in China is going to move to. I don't know where your your friend lives in the Orlando area, but like they come from living in this really dense place, probably don't own a car, all this access to great transit everywhere, and then they wind up out by UCF or something where you 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 can't even walk. You can't even walk to the CVS or the Publix. Um, I don't. I wonder. My point is like I wonder if it's like in my case where I just wound up somewhere sight unseen and I didn't really. I'm like, oh, I look around. Transit access seems good. I can walk to the supermarket. This bus goes straight to school. Everything's good. Um, and then, um, or if people really go for it, they're like, I'm moving to the States. I'm going all in. I'm gonna have a quarter acre out in the middle of nowhere, and I'm gonna have three cars. Yeah,
That
I
was
don't
that
know.
was the other thing that really struck me when I came down here as a probation officer, and I was actually, I'm sure that job was traumatic for someone who's a planner or from a bigger city. One of the things that shocked me in the neighborhoods was how many cars are parked on people's lawns here because everybody needs a car. There's like four cars, like the streets were full of cars with parallel parking, and then the driveways, because people use the garages for storage, the cars are so big that they can't fit
Mm,
inside. And then there'd be like four cars parked on everyone's
yeah,
lawn.
yeah.
I'm like, it looked to me, the first thing I thought of was when you walk into a living room, if you have a toddler, if you have kids, and there's just toys everywhere. Like these are everybody's toys, just strewn like on the lawn and in the streets. They're just everywhere.
Yeah, it's really. Um, you see that occasionally in my neighborhood too, and it's yeah. But at the same time, like I don't. In some regards, I feel like I never left South Philly. Like the yards got bigger, but people's sort of obsession with their cars and their territorialness over where they can park
Mm.
is the same. Um, and like I don't know. I'm sure you've seen the videos about like when it snows and how people
With
will save their
cones and
parking space
chairs
after
and
they've dug it out.
trash
Yeah.
cans
But even when it doesn't
for
snow, people still
months.
do that.
Months
Uh,
after a snowstorm, that just
mhm.
the whole city, you'll see
Yep.
entire streets, both sides just lined with cones and lawn chairs and
Yeah, yeah, and that's the first thing every time there was a meeting, and yeah, something else worth having a conversation about. Maybe in the future. But I was thinking about this last week that I used to go to a lot of community meetings when I was in Philly because there was a fair amount of development happening, and it was always very controversial because you in most scenarios you couldn't even rebuild a row home by right. You had to get a variance because the FAR had changed. And I don't even like I don't even know what the expectation was. It's like how do you make like half the lots in your city non-conforming? Like what were you even thinking? Like what was supposed to happen? Like people were just gonna like redevelop suburban subdivisions here? Like I don't. Anyway, um, so there were a lot of those meetings, and to me, it's like if your code is written in a way that doesn't allow people to actually build, that's on
Hmm.
purpose. Like you don't not know that that's happening, and people complain about it constantly. Like the development community is always in your ear, and so like because where I'm working now, there's a big rewrite of the code happening, and most of the conversation is around housing because we don't have enough of it, and it's expensive. What there is really expensive. Um, you know, like one good thing that's been happening here, I think, is that we've been building a crap ton of apartments to the point like rents have come down actually, um, like
Where?
10% or
Where?
something. Um,
Give me the website.
not in your neighborhood. Um, you're gonna have to move out to Lake Nona for those cheap rents. Um, but but uh, but no. So it's it, to me, it's like it's a kind of soft corruption. Like you know that your code is trash and that no one can build anything without having to come to the board first. And so like you're basically politicizing development on purpose to try to extract what's exactions really. I mean in a legal sense that's what it is. It's an exaction, right? You're trying to extract something from the developer, and you're making the process take forever. You're adding costs on to the end user, whoever that is, whether it's a tenant or a buyer, and you're limiting the supply of housing. And like I don't say that to be like pro developer or whatever, but it's like it's it is like when you it it's a kind of corruption. It's not like the in your face pay me kind of corruption, but you're like controlling the process in a kind of extra legal way that's not fair, it's not transparent, and the people who suffer from it aren't the developers, they're the people who are either buying the house or renting the apartment. It's not um I don't know if any of that makes sense, but it's kind of what I was thinking when I was hearing the political pushback to what I'm working on now. You know that like why do you if the density has already been approved, right? In the comp plan or in the code or whatever, then why do you need it to come back to you? Like, why do you need to politicize it? Like, what? Who does that benefit,
Mm,
right? And I don't. I think the commissioners will say that it benefits their constituents, but then who are their constituents? You know, is it people who are trying to buy those homes or rent those apartments? I don't know, but um, yeah, yeah, I don't like it. I don't like it. Um, sorry, I don't know how we got there, but it was South Philly and parking. It was South Philly and parking. That's all I know. And then yeah, I don't yeah, I have like a love hate relationship with it, you know. Um, like I love it. I love the people. I love the culture and the food. But then at the same time, like I don't like the culture of Philly. I'm talking about. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like, yeah, it can like there's something to be said for tradition, but then there are problems with
yeah.
tradition.
Do they do?
and
Do
just
they do
do.
that cone and chair in the street thing in DC and New York? Like I'm trying to think if other cities tolerate that.
It's definitely it definitely happens in Boston. It definitely happens in
Mm,
Brooklyn. Um, uh, um, I don't I don't know about DC. I would
it's
imagine that they
just I
do it too.
cannot.
Like, oh no, I've seen it. I've seen it in
I
Baltimore.
can't.
I've
It's
definitely seen it in
so
Baltimore. So I can't
annoying.
imagine that.
Used to drive me nuts. Those are public parking spaces.
Yeah, yeah. It just, I mean, it gets into so much more that like it's not a parking space. It's the public right of
Mm-mm.
way. You know, like it's a privilege to use it, and you're not even paying for it. Um, and you're using all of this public space. I mean, like the amount of acreage just in like one city neighborhood is insane, and the amount of trees that could be
Yeah,
planted. You could have you have busways, you could have cycle tracks. Like you're talking like from the curb 8 feet out for the entire length of the
yeah,
city. Because most of the streets just go straight through from one
yeah.
end to the other. It's it's total it's total insanity, and like in what other scenario would you be able to store your personal crap
Man,
out in like on public
true.
property? Like it's and not the city has to maintain that too. They've got to repave
Yeah.
it. It becomes part of the budget. It's yeah, it, it's so crazy. Even here, I think about what a waste it is. Like people are parking on the street, and I'm like, it's fine when someone comes to visit. If you want to have a party or something,
Mhm.
that's nice. But like, if you have so many cars that you can't fit them in your driveway, then you have too many cars.
Mhm.
It's, yeah. Um,
The city can compel people to have too many cars. And
that's true.
that's the big
Yeah.
problem is whether you want them or not, people need them. There's people who wish they didn't need a car for their teenage children, but they just don't, these adults don't have the time or the resources to shuttle them around anymore. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's it's such a
Um,
big problem for American cities to undo the craze of the 1950s and 60s car explosion. You know, I was thinking sometimes,
mhm.
honestly, I think of it like this. Um, it's like when when I used to work when I worked at that grocery store at Giant, and like something, let's say, would spill on the floor, and you'd have to go get a mop and clean it up. That is like your job. You're doing your job. Your job is to clean up, like to clean up the place, clean up the spills. And if there were something to, for example, prevent that from happening, like maybe like let's say the spill's coming from a machine, and every now and then you have to turn it off and wipe and clean up. And then they come up with a new machine that doesn't have that feature anymore, and it makes your job more efficient and take less time. It's sort of like when things break and your job is to fix them, and they come up with up with products that are they break less often. It's like now your job is being threatened. I thought about that in criminal justice too. Like if we make roads that are safer,
Mm,
the businesses that rely on
yeah.
crashes and cleanups and towing, there's people who profit on our current system as it is. And anytime you talk about changing or eliminating the
Yeah.
problems, the people who capitalize on fixing those problems aren't going to be so happy, you know? The,
Yeah. Yeah. And there are people, I'm dealing with it now. There are people in the bureaucracy who are threatened by improvements within the bureaucracy. Like making things more efficient
mm-hmm.
threatens people. Even if it I don't, and it's weird too. Like people get threatened by it, and it's so obvious that like the resistance to change is like the fear of what the change
Mhm.
means, and it could either be having to like learn something new, or just that maybe you'll be redundant, you know. But usually, what that means is that we don't hire new people. Not that the people who are already there are get
Uh-huh.
pushed out the door. Like that's not really what happens. So, I I don't. Yeah, it's very strange. But people's like, yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. But like in Australia, the whole planning law is it's the same everywhere you go in
Uh-huh.
the state. And here, so many people's jobs are built around the knowledge of the system where they work, and the system everywhere is different enough that you have to learn it all over again. And if you leave, you take a huge amount of institutional and process knowledge with you, and that should not be the case. And it's, um, but people like it.
Like,
People like it that way. They
just
feel
think
important.
about like the stroads that are lined with billboards of like injury lawyers, you know? And then these planners are talking about making safer streets. It's like, no, don't do that. I'll get fewer phone calls about injuries. Our system,
Yeah, unfortunately, I think
like
it's gonna.
whenever a system's imperfect, it like troubles me that there's entire businesses and enterprises that thrive on that imperfection. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
that
yeah,
problem solving means,
yeah, yeah. Everything has to be monetized.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I was saying, unfortunately, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, because um, the amount of apartments, especially, you've heard about the Live Local Act,
Yeah,
right?
I'm not super familiar with it, but I know it allows provisions for like affordable housing, like exceptions to where things can be built.
Yep. So yeah, so as long as you have 20% of your units that are 120% of AMI or less, then you can build apartments in anything that's zoned commercial
Mm,
or industrial. By right, like you don't need to. Yeah, you just submit the application. I mean, basically everyone's had to change their code to adopt for it, which is uh, like it's a good strategy, right? But it's not without its drawbacks. You're gonna so much commercial property is on these roads, and we're about to wind up with like thousands of new units of apartments on these
mm,
highways, which is going to mean just naturally because there's so much commercial there. There's going to be more people walking. There's going to be more
yeah.
conflict. Um, so I don't. Um, I, I know, I know, like I know what the answer is in the long term, but in the like short term, I don't know what the answer is because those apartments are going to come online way faster than those roads get
Hmm.
redesigned, and it's and and I know that the DOT approach is not going to be to take a lane away from cars and add transit. It's going to be to widen the road to add
Mm.
transit. It's going to be to make the problem
Oh
worse
God.
and then try to figure out a way to fix it.
I'm just thinking about the school buses picking up the kids and
So,
stuff, and the people who do use transit, where the bus drops them off on the opposite side of the road when it's time to leave work from home, I guess. They have to cross. People are going to be crossing these.
yeah, no, they can't. The school
Yeah, I
buses
mean
can't do
like
that,
the
but
transit
but
buses will have adults crossing the
yeah,
street mid-block
yep,
because the blocks are super blocks. It's a super block system.
yep, yeah, yeah. I mean, on on 436, all up and down, the where you where you board the bus is nowhere near where you get
Yeah.
off the bus. In terms of walking, you could walk a half mile or more just to get back to where you started from. Um, yeah, it's not it's not a great scenario. And what yeah, I mean, we basically really need BRT on all those arterials, and that needs to come from like a
Mhm.
travel lane, like those. It needs to be a road diet, and that diet needs to include BRT. Um, and that's already where not most, but probably like a plurality of apartments are on those like roads like 436 and um, 434. And yeah, I don't know why that is. um, Goldenrod, Aloma, they're just full of apartments, all
Yeah.
of them.
I was thinking when I first came
Um,
here and I was looking at the characteristics, because I think I'm not unusual in that a lot of planners shop for housing on Google Earth, looking at the neighborhood density and where they want to live, or where they want to go, their weekend plans,
yeah.
vacation plans. They look on Google Earth to see how close together buildings are, the densities. When I, as a probation officer, we're trained to identify paraphernalia, evidence of drug habits, evidence of things people shouldn't be doing.
Oh.
So, like, somebody obviously, if you find evidence of drug use, like crack pipes or, you know, little baggies or scales, things that are associated with drug dealing, or if someone you on your caseload has an alcohol problem and you go into their home. What I mean to say is it's there. You see the evidence. There's beer bottles, the trash cans, the recycle bins are full of empty beer bottles. It's evidence of a problem. So when you look at
Mhm.
Orlando and cities like this model, this car dependent model, you see all of the paraphernalia that comes with it. And when I came down here, it was just one satellite image of Orlando. You see I-4 and what is that, the 428 just cut through the 408. Yeah, 408, I-4 and 408. They
Oh,
cut
408,
right
yeah.
through the heart of the city. You see parking lots and big box stores everywhere. If you look at street views of the neighborhoods, like I said before, people have got
Mhm.
3, 4, 5 cars parked on their lawns. There's so much evidence of a problem. This is a problem. It's evidence of a car addiction. You just see all of the signs
Yeah.
everywhere. The billboards of the "Have you been injured?" The sides of the Lynx buses have more injury law firms. Call me now. That- all of that should
Yeah.
not be normal, but it is.
Yeah. It's funny because in Philly on the subway or on the bus, it's always like a workers comp
Mhm.
issue or like a slip and fall. But here it's always like auto accident.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's never your fault. Never your fault.
um,
I'll fight for you.
no, no, can't be. Right. Right. Um, yeah. Oh, it's so much work. it's it's so much work. Um, okay, we're just over 2 hours here, and I gotta take. I have to drive the kid to dance lessons. Um, but yeah, it's unfortunate because there's one right down the street she could take herself to, but that can't be the one that we go to. Um, so yeah, I have to unfortunately get out of here and get down to LB McLeod Boulevard or whatever it is. Um, and yeah, I think that's about it. But thank you for
Yes,
joining us.
it was fun. It was it was good discussion. Thank you for having me on the show.
Um, yeah, and if if you can, it would be great to have you back. after you graduate, um, once you've kind of gotten settled in wherever you are.
Sounds good to me.
we'll see we'll see if you got a groundbreaking local offer that keeps you in Orlando. Um, but I am hoping for great things for you.
Thank you very much.
All right, Austin. Good luck out there, and we will be in touch.
Take care. Nice talking to you, Jim. Thanks for having me.